It was raining when he left. The kind of rain that doesn't wash anything away. It just reminds you that some things never will. My name is Claire, and this is the story of how I gave everything I had to a man who walked away as if I never existed. I used to believe love could fix people. I believed if you gave enough, cared enough, stayed long enough, they'd stay too. I was wrong. I learned that love without limits can destroy the one who gives it. The day he walked out, the apartment looked like a battlefield. Half-packed boxes, clothes scattered, silence heavier than the rain outside. He didn't yell. He didn't cry. He just said, "You'll be fine, Claire," like it was a favor. I remember staring at his hands, those same hands that once traced promises on my skin, now folding his last shirt without shaking. When the door closed, it didn't sound like wood. It sounded like the end of a heartbeat. I sat on the floor for hours trying to understand what everything meant. Was it the money I lent him when he lost his job? The trust I gave when everyone told me not to? Or the way I waited every night, believing he'd change? Love, I realized, isn't about how much you give. It's about who you give it to. And sometimes, the wrong person makes your generosity look like weakness. When we met, I wasn't looking for anyone. He came into the cafe where I worked, wet from the rain, holding a book instead of an umbrella. His name was Ethan. He smiled like he'd been smiling all his life, and I believed it. He ordered black coffee, no sugar, no milk. That's how I should have known. People who drink their coffee bitter often carry something heavy inside. But I was too busy falling into his quiet voice to notice the warning. He started coming every day. Always at the same table, always the same drink. Sometimes he brought his laptop. Sometimes he just stared out the window. One day he asked about the scar on my wrist. I told him it was from an accident when I was a kid. He said, "Some scars never heal right, even when they close." I didn't know if he meant mine or his own. That's when I realized there was more to him than the silence. Weeks turned into months. He learned my favorite songs, how I hated small talk, how I loved the smell of old books. He said I made him feel steady, like life wasn't chasing him anymore. I didn't ask what he was running from. I thought love meant trusting without asking. I didn't know silence can be a disguise. One night, we walked by the lake near my apartment. The city lights were blurry in the water, and his reflection looked like a man already halfway gone. He said, "Do you ever feel like you owe people parts of yourself?" I said, "Only the ones I love." He smiled, but it wasn't joy. It was guilt. I didn't see it then. I just took his hand and told him I wasn't going anywhere. I didn't know he already was. He moved in 3 months later. He brought little, but filled every corner of my world. My mornings started with his voice. My nights ended with his silence. Used to think silence meant peace, until I realized it was distance. Every "I'm fine," every "don't worry about it" was a wall he built brick by brick, and I kept decorating it with hope. There were signs, late calls, closed doors, money missing from the drawer, a new password on his phone. I told myself love was about patience. I didn't want to be the jealous girlfriend. I thought if I gave him space, he'd come back closer. Instead, he learned I'd always wait. And he did what people do when they know they're forgiven before they even apologize. He took more. The night before he left, he held me tighter than usual. He whispered, "You deserve more than I can give." I laughed, thinking it was one of those poetic moments lovers say before they fall asleep. But his voice cracked when he said my name. I should have listened. I should have asked, "What are you saying, Ethan?" But I kissed him instead. I didn't want answers. I wanted the illusion to last a little longer. When I woke up, the bed was cold. His clothes, his laptop, his books, gone. Only a note on the counter, "Don't look for me, you already gave me too much." No signature, just a ring. My ring. The one he said reminded him of forever. I stared at it for hours, hoping it would explain itself. It never did. The rain outside felt like applause for the end of something that never had a beginning. I wanted to hate him. I wanted to scream, but all I could do was whisper his name over and over like a prayer that no one answered. Later, I checked my bank account. Empty. I checked my phone. Disconnected. I checked my reflection and didn't recognize her. The girl who believed in love had disappeared, and in her place stood someone who knew what heartbreak really costs. That's how it began, the day I lost him, and the version of myself who thought love was enough. I didn't tell anyone at first. I didn't know how to explain that the man I loved had taken everything, not just the money, but the version of me that believed in tomorrow. My best friend Mia kept calling. I ignored her for days until she showed up at my door with 2 coffees and eyes full of worry. She didn't need me to say it. She looked at the half-empty apartment and whispered, "He's gone, isn't he?" I nodded, and for the first time I cried. Mia didn't say, "I told you so." She just sat with me on the kitchen floor, our backs against the wall, letting the silence do the talking. "You loved him too much," she finally said. "No," I answered. "I loved him the way I wish someone would love me." She didn't argue. She knew some truths don't need fixing, just space to hurt. The next morning, I went to the cafe where we first met. His chair was still there, empty, waiting like I was. I watched the rain tap against the glass, and every drop felt like a memory. The barista asked, "The usual?" I nodded, even though the smell of coffee made me sick now. I wanted to remember him, but also to forget. A contradiction that became my new normal. Days passed like that. Blurry, repetitive, quiet. I went to work, smiled at strangers, told everyone I was okay. But inside, I was carrying a ghost. Every sound reminded me of him. Footsteps in the hall, the opening of a door, the hum of the refrigerator at night. It's strange how absence can be louder than presence. Then one afternoon, I received an envelope in the mail. No return address, just my name in his handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a photograph of us by the lake, the one from that night he asked if I ever felt like I owed people parts of myself. On the back, just 5 words. "You were never the debt." I didn't understand what it meant. Was it an apology? A goodbye? A confession? I stared at those words until they blurred. For a moment I thought maybe he regretted everything. Maybe he missed me too. But I'd learned something cruel about love. Sometimes closure doesn't come from them. It comes from realizing you'll never get it. Still, I couldn't let go. I started searching for him online. His social media, his old job, even his friends. Nothing. He had vanished as if his whole existence was erased. One night, desperate, I drove to the last address I knew he had before we met. The building was abandoned. Its windows broken, walls covered in graffiti. A neighbor told me that guy? He left years ago, owed people money, disappeared overnight. My heart sank. I sat in the car for hours, holding the photograph, realizing I was one of many stories he'd walked away from. I wasn't special, just the next chapter in his escape. For weeks, I tried to rebuild my life. But every time I looked in the mirror, I saw a woman who couldn't stop asking why. Why did he choose me? Why did I let him in? Why wasn't I enough to make him stay? I wanted answers from someone who no longer existed. Then, one evening, I went back to the lake again. The sky was gray and the water still. I stood at the same spot where he once told me that people owe pieces of themselves. I whispered, "You took mine. Now give it back." But the wind was the only thing that answered. That night, I dreamed of him. He was standing in our old apartment, smiling, holding that same book he had the day we met. He said, "You can't hate me forever, Claire." I wanted to scream, but I couldn't move. When I woke up, my pillow was wet with tears. Something inside me shifted that morning. I realized if I kept chasing ghosts, I'd become one. So I started small, cooking breakfast, opening the curtains, taking walks alone. I found pieces of peace in things I used to ignore. The smell of rain, the warmth of sunlight, the sound of my own breathing. Healing isn't a straight line. Some days, I felt strong. Others, I fell apart over the smallest thing, a song, a scent, a face in a crowd that looked like his. But I kept reminding myself, I survived the day he left. I can survive the days after. Months later, while organizing old photos, I found another envelope hidden inside a book. It wasn't from him, it was from myself. I'd written it years ago before I met Ethan. "Remember who you were before love tried to change you?" it said. I smiled through tears. Maybe that was the closure I needed all along. That night, I lit a candle and placed his note beside it. I whispered goodbye, not to him, but to the version of me who kept waiting. The flame flickered, soft and calm, like a heartbeat finding rhythm again. I didn't erase him. You can't erase what shapes you. But I learned to live with the echo, not as pain, but as proof that I once loved without fear. And maybe someday that will be enough. Time passes differently after heartbreak. The days stretch, but the nights feel endless. I used to count time by the sound of his laughter, the warmth of his hand on my back, the way he said my name when he was half asleep. Now, I counted silence. I learned the weight of hours when nothing happens, and the courage it takes just to keep breathing. I moved to a smaller apartment a few blocks away from the cafe. It had one bedroom, thin walls, and windows that caught the morning light. It wasn't much, but it was mine. The first night there, I sat on the floor with a cup of tea and told myself, "This is where you start over." It sounded brave in my head, but inside I still felt like a broken version of the woman I used to be. One afternoon, as I walked back from the grocery store, I saw a man playing guitar in the corner. His music filled the street, soft and sorrowful. I stopped to listen. When he finished, he smiled and said, "Sad songs help heal sad hearts." I didn't know if it was advice or coincidence, but I dropped $1 into his case and said, "Then maybe I should listen more often." That was the first time in months I spoke to a stranger without pretending to be okay. At work, people stopped asking about Ethan. I think they could tell that part of my life was sealed behind quiet eyes and forced smiles, but Mia kept checking in. Every Sunday she'd drag me to brunch, make me laugh, and remind me I was still alive. "You don't get to disappear," she'd say. "He already did that. You don't have to." One day, while scrolling through social media, I stumbled on a post from someone who looked familiar. It was Ethan's old friend, Adam. He had posted a photo, a group picture from a small music bar in another city. My heart froze. There he was, Ethan, smiling, alive, untouched by the wreckage he left behind. My fingers trembled. I clicked on the location tag, a bar 2 hours away. For days I fought the urge to go. Part of me wanted closure. Another part feared reopening the wound. But curiosity has its own gravity. It pulls you where you promised you'd never go. That Friday I drove there. The night air was cold and my heart beat faster with every mile. The bar was small, crowded, full of dim light and laughter. And then I saw him. Sitting at a table near the stage, drink in hand, talking to a woman I didn't know. She touched his arm when she laughed, the same way I used to. I froze in the doorway, invisible. I thought of all the nights I cried, all the prayers I whispered, all the pain I carried. And there he was, happy, whole, as if I'd never been a part of his story. I could have walked away. I should have, but I didn't. I walked up to him. He turned, surprised. "Claire?" he said, like a ghost had spoken his name. The woman beside him looked confused. I smiled, the kind of smile that hides earthquakes. "Hi, Ethan," I said softly. "You left your ring." I placed it on the table, the one he'd returned in that note, and turned to leave. He grabbed my wrist. "Wait," he said. His voice cracked. I wanted to come back. I looked at him, really looked. He had aged, not in years, but in guilt. "You already did," I said, in my memories. "You live there now." I pulled my hand free. As I walked away, my body shook, not from sadness, but release. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The chapter was closed. That night, I parked by the lake again, the same one where we once stood under the stars. The air was colder now, sharper, but cleaner. I whispered, "You were my storm," but I survived the flood. And for the first time, I meant it. In the days that followed, something in me changed. The mornings didn't feel heavy anymore. I started painting again, something I hadn't done in years. My first painting was a window with light coming through and in the corner a shadow leaving. It wasn't bitterness. It was acceptance. Mia came over one evening, saw it hanging on the wall, and smiled. "It's beautiful," she said. "It's the story of a girl who finally let go." I laughed. "No," I told her. "It's the story of a girl who finally remembered herself." Weeks later, I got an email from an art gallery hosting a local exhibition. Mia had sent my painting without telling me. "You need people to see this," she said. I wanted to say no, I wasn't ready. But maybe that was the point. Healing doesn't wait until you're ready. It begins the moment you decide to show your scars in the light. The night of the exhibition, I stood in front of my painting as strangers admired it. Some asked about the story behind it. I just said, it's about love, loss, and finding yourself again. And that was enough. I didn't expect to meet anyone there. But as I was leaving, the man with the guitar from the street approached me. He smiled. "You listened," he said. "And you healed." I laughed. "I'm still learning." He nodded. "Then keep listening." He introduced himself. "Daniel." His eyes were calm, steady. We talked for hours about music, pain, and the strange way broken people recognize each other. He didn't ask about Ethan, and I didn't mention him. Some stories don't need retelling. They just live quietly in the space between two healed souls. As I walked home that night, the city lights didn't look cold anymore. They shimmered like reminders that endings can be beautiful too. Daniel became a quiet constant in my days, like sunlight that slips in through the cracks without asking permission. We started meeting for coffee after work. Sometimes we talked about everything, sometimes about nothing. He didn't fill the silence with promises, and maybe that's why I trusted him. I didn't need fireworks anymore. I needed peace. One evening, as we sat by the window of the same cafe where I once met Ethan, I caught myself laughing. It was soft, real, the kind of laugh that doesn't hide sadness behind it. Daniel noticed. "You haven't laughed like that in a while," he said. I smiled. "How would you know?" He shrugged. "I can tell." That's when I realized some people see your healing before you do. He was a musician, playing at local bars and teaching kids on weekends. His songs weren't about love, but about life, the quiet kind that keeps you breathing. I told him once that I was scared of falling again. He said, "Then don't fall. Grow. Falling breaks things. Growing makes them stronger." His words stayed with me. We started spending weekends together. We'd walk through the park, share old stories, and sometimes just sit near the water, listening to the world move. There was no rush, no fear, no need to prove anything. Love, I learned, didn't have to hurt to be real. It could just be calm. But healing isn't a straight line. One night, after dinner at his apartment, I saw something that broke me again. A simple black leather notebook on his shelf. It looked exactly like the one Ethan used to carry. My chest tightened. I froze. Daniel noticed my silence. "What is it?" he asked. I shook my head. "Nothing." But he saw it. He saw the ghost still living in my eyes. He sat beside me. "You can tell me," he said. And so I did. Every word, every memory, every scar. I told him about Ethan, the love, the lies, the disappearance. When I finished, I expected him to look at me differently, like I was broken beyond repair. But he didn't. He just said, "You're still here. That's what matters." That night, I cried. Not because I missed Ethan, but because someone finally stayed after hearing the whole story. After that, things between us grew naturally, like a plant finding light. He never asked for more than I could give. He never made me feel small for still healing. And in return, I gave him something I didn't think I'd have again: trust. Months passed, and one evening, Daniel invited me to his show. "You should come," he said. "I wrote something new." I sat near the front, surrounded by the hum of the crowd. When he stepped on stage, the lights dimmed, and his voice filled the room, soft, raw, sincere. "This one," he said into the mic, "is for someone who taught me that love isn't about who stays, but who helps you stay standing." The melody was gentle, the lyrics simple. You don't need a promise, you don't need forever. You just need someone who doesn't walk away when it rains. Tears filled my eyes, but they weren't heavy anymore. They were light, the kind that wash away, not drown. After the show, I went backstage. He smiled and I hugged him without words. Sometimes silence says everything. That night, walking home under the same sky where everything once ended, I realized something. I no longer looked for Ethan's shadow in the crowd. I wasn't haunted anymore. The pain had turned into a story, one that taught me to love differently, not less. Still, life has its cruel sense of timing. A few weeks later, I received a letter. No name, just an address written in familiar handwriting. My heart stopped. Ethan. I hesitated for hours before opening it. Inside, there was a single line. I heard your name in a song. I hope you're happy. There was no apology, no explanation, just that. For a long moment, I sat staring at the paper. Then, slowly, I smiled. I realized something powerful. He didn't deserve to know if I was happy. That was mine now. My happiness, my healing, my story. None of it belonged to him anymore. I burned the letter that night. The flame danced, golden and free, consuming the last piece of what used to hurt. Daniel found me on the balcony, watching the ashes float away. Letting go? He asked. I nodded. Completely. He took my hand. Then let's see what's next. That was the moment I knew. My story wasn't about him leaving. It was about me staying. There's something strange about peace. When you've lived too long in chaos, it feels like a trap. Every quiet morning with Daniel, every calm conversation, every moment that didn't end in heartbreak, scared me. I wasn't used to love without pain. I kept waiting for something to go wrong. That's what trauma does. It makes comfort feel suspicious, Daniel noticed. He always did. One morning as we sat on the balcony drinking coffee, he said, "You keep looking for the storm." I frowned. "What do you mean?" He smiled gently. "You check the weather even when the sky is clear." I didn't answer. I just stared at my cup, realizing he was right. I didn't know how to exist in peace. I only knew how to survive it. I started painting again, more than before. My apartment became a sea of canvases, colors, and unfinished emotions. Daniel would sit nearby, playing guitar softly while I painted. Sometimes he'd hum a tune that matched my brushstrokes, as if we were speaking in the same language without words. For the first time, my art wasn't about loss, it was about becoming. But the universe has a way of testing the things you think you've healed. One afternoon, I got a call from an unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. "Is this Claire Bennett?" A voice asked. "Yes," I said cautiously. "This is Detective Harris from the Portland Police Department. We believe you might know someone named Ethan Cole." The name hit me like cold air. My heart stopped. "Why?" I whispered. He paused. "We found his car near the river last night. There was no one inside, but your name and number were in his wallet. We just wanted to ask if you've had contact with him recently." I couldn't speak. My throat closed and all I managed was, no, not for a long time. After hanging up, I stood frozen, phone in hand, memories flooding like a storm I thought had passed. Daniel walked in and immediately saw it on my face. "What happened?" he asked. "It's him," I said quietly. "Ethan." We sat in silence for a long time. I told Daniel about the call, about the letter, about the possibility that Ethan was in trouble or gone. He listened, calm and steady, the way only he could. "You don't owe his ghost your peace," he said softly. "But if you need closure, I'll drive you." The next morning we drove to Portland. The riverbank was gray and still, lined with yellow police tape. An officer recognized my name and nodded politely. "We don't know what happened," he said. The car was empty. No signs of struggle. He could have left, or he could be gone. I stood there, staring at the water. It looked endless, like the kind of silence Ethan always carried. I didn't cry. I just whispered. He always loved running away. Maybe this time he ran too far. Daniel put his arm around me. "You don't have to forgive him," he said. "You just have to stop following him." And I did. Right there by that river, I let go of the last piece of the man who took everything from me. We drove back in silence. That night I painted again, but not sadness this time. The canvas was bright, full of gold and blue. When Daniel saw it, he said, "It looks like sunrise." I nodded. "It is." From that day on, something in me shifted permanently. I stopped trying to fix my past and started building my future. Daniel and I traveled together, small trips at first, the coasts, the mountains, the towns that looked like postcards. We laughed easily, loved gently, and learned that healing isn't forgetting, it's remembering without pain. But even peace has its shadows. One night, after a show, Daniel found me sitting alone outside the venue. "You okay?" he asked. I hesitated. Sometimes I still feel him, not like I miss him, but like a ghost watching. Daniel knelt beside me. "Maybe that's not him," he said. "Maybe that's the part of you still learning it's safe to stay." He kissed my forehead. "You don't have to keep proving you've healed," he whispered. "You already did." That night, I finally slept without dreams. No rain, no rivers, no ghosts. Just quiet. Weeks later, I got an email from the detective. Ethan Cole declared missing, presumed drowned. Case closed. I stared at the screen for a long time, then closed it. There was nothing left to say. Some endings don't need words, only peace. When I told Daniel, he just nodded and said, "Then let's live for the both of you, the one who left and the one who stayed." I smiled, tears softening my vision. "No," I said gently. "Let's live for the one who learned." That was the night I realized I had become my own closure. After Ethan's case was closed, I thought the story had ended. But endings have echoes, quiet ones that follow you into the future until you learn to turn them into music. Life began to move again. Slow, gentle, honest. I started volunteering at a local art center where we taught painting to women recovering from grief, heartbreak, or abuse. When I first walked into that room, I saw versions of myself everywhere, eyes tired from crying, hands unsure if they could still create beauty. The first time I spoke to the group, my voice trembled. "I used to paint to remember him," I said. "Now I paint to remember me." Silence filled the room, but it wasn't empty. It was listening. One woman came up after the class, tears in her eyes. "How did you stop missing him?" she asked. I smiled softly. "I didn't," I said. "I just stopped feeding the memories." That night, I told Daniel about it. He smiled, proud. "You're helping people find light in places you once thought were dead." I shrugged. "Maybe that's what healing is, handing someone the candle you once had to light alone." He kissed my hand and said, "And that's why I love you." His words didn't scare me this time. They felt steady, like home. As the months passed, I began exhibiting my paintings again. The gallery that once displayed my work invited me to host a small solo show. The theme was simple: what remains? I chose that name because healing isn't about what we lose, it's about what we keep, what survives. On opening night, people moved quietly through the room. Some smiled, some cried. My favorite piece hung in the center, a painting of a river, calm and golden under morning light. I named it Closure. I didn't need to explain it. The image spoke louder than any story I could tell. Daniel played guitar in the corner, his voice low and soothing. The song he sang was the same one he wrote for me months ago about staying when it rains. As I listened, I realized I had come full circle. The rain no longer frightened me. It reminded me of everything I had survived. After the show, an elderly woman approached me. She said, "Your paintings feel like forgiveness." I smiled. Maybe they are. Later that night, when everyone had gone, I stood alone in the gallery. The lights dimmed, the city hummed outside. I looked at my paintings, colors born from pain, now shining in peace. And for the first time, I whispered thank you. Not to Ethan, not to Daniel, but to myself. To the version of me who stayed when everything else left. Weeks later, I received a message on social media. It was from someone I didn't know, a young woman named Ava. She wrote, "I saw your exhibition. Your story helped me leave someone who was hurting me. Thank you for reminding me I deserve peace. I cried reading it. Because in her words, I saw proof that pain can bloom into something beautiful when you choose to share it. Daniel and I began planning a trip after that, not to escape, but to celebrate. Where do you want to go? He asked. I smiled. Anywhere the sun rises slow. We decided on a small coastal town. When we arrived, the air smelled like salt and freedom. We rented a cottage by the sea. Every morning I painted the waves while Daniel played music beside me. One afternoon he handed me a small box. My heart skipped. Inside was a ring, simple, gold, delicate. No promises, he said softly. Just presents. Tears filled my eyes. You're not afraid I'll leave? I asked. He smiled. You're not the one who leaves anymore. We didn't plan a wedding, or vows, or forever. We just lived, fully, presently, gratefully. Because after you've lost everything, you learn the value of what stays. Sometimes, late at night, I'd stand by the ocean and think about Ethan. Not with anger, not with love, just quiet understanding. He was a lesson I needed to grow. Without him, I wouldn't have found myself. And maybe that's the secret no one tells you about heartbreak. It doesn't end your story. It shapes the chapter that teaches you who you were meant to become. So, when people ask how I survived, I tell them this. He took everything and left, but he didn't know I was everything. It happened 2 years later on a spring morning that smelled like new beginnings. Daniel and I were living in that same coastal town, our little house filled with light and music. Life had grown steady, tender. I had learned how to live without the need for dramatic turns, without the ghosts of what was. But peace is fragile. Sometimes it gets tested when you least expect it. That morning, I was walking through the farmer's market, basket in hand, when I heard a voice behind me. Familiar, quiet, impossible. Claire? My heart froze. I turned. And there he was, Ethan, alive, older, thinner. A small scar under his eye, like life had finally caught up to him. For a moment, everything around me blurred. The sounds, the people, even the light. I thought I was dreaming. He smiled weakly. I didn't think you'd recognize me. I almost didn't, I said. My voice surprised me. It was calm, steady, nothing like the shaking heart inside me. He nodded, eyes lowered. You look happy. I am, I answered. You? He gave a small, hollow laugh. Trying to be. We stood there. Two people who once shared everything, now strangers meeting in the daylight. The silence between us wasn't heavy this time. It was simply done. I heard about the gallery, he said. Your paintings, they're beautiful. How did you? I stopped. Never mind. Thank you. He took a deep breath. I didn't come to ask for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. His voice trembled. I just wanted to see that you're okay. I looked at him closely, searching for the man I once loved. He wasn't there anymore. The eyes were the same, but the soul behind them looked tired, like someone who had finally met his own regrets. I was angry for a long time, I said quietly. But now I just hope you find peace. Real peace. He nodded, tears filling his eyes. You already did, he whispered. For the first time since the day he left, I saw him as human, not a villain, not a heartbreak, just a broken man who made choices he couldn't undo. And maybe that was enough. Goodbye, Ethan, I said softly. Goodbye, Claire. I turned and walked away before the moment could become anything else. And with every step, the weight I didn't know I still carried began to fade. When I got home, Daniel was in the garden, humming while trimming the roses. I stood there for a moment, watching him, his steady hands, his quiet rhythm. He looked up and smiled. You okay? I nodded. I saw him. He didn't flinch. And it's over, I said. For real this time. He came closer, brushing a strand of hair from my face. Then maybe now it's time to start the next chapter. That night, we walked along the beach as the sun disappeared behind the horizon. The waves touched our feet, cold and soft. Daniel said, Do you ever think about what would have happened if he hadn't left? I thought for a moment, then shook my head. If he hadn't left, I wouldn't have found you. I wouldn't have found me. He smiled, took my hand, and kissed it gently. Then maybe you didn't lose everything after all. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of salt and rain. I closed my eyes, letting the sound of the ocean wrap around us. For the first time, the rain didn't remind me of pain. It felt like blessing. When we got home, I stood by the window and watched the raindrops trace lines down the glass. Life, I realized, always gives back what love once took. Just not in the way you expect. In the distance, thunder rolled, soft and far. I whispered goodbye, my storm, and smiled. The rain lasted through the night. Soft, steady, and comforting, like a familiar song played in a new key. I couldn't sleep, so I made tea and sat by the window watching the lights of the town shimmer through the water. Beside me, Daniel slept peacefully, one arm stretched toward my side of the bed, as if even in his dreams he didn't want me to drift too far. For a long time, I just watched him. The man who came into my life when all I had left were ruins. He never tried to rebuild me, he just stayed long enough for me to do it myself. I thought about the way he listened, the way he understood silence, the way his presence made the world feel steady again. It hit me then, love isn't found. It's built, quietly, patiently, one morning at a time. The next day I drove alone to the cliff above the ocean, the place where I often painted. Brought with me a small box. Inside were the things that once tied me to the past. Ethan's note, the photograph from the lake, and the ring he left behind. I sat there for hours, the wind pulling at my hair, the sea roaring below, and I thought about everything that had happened. The pain, the loss, the lessons. One by one, I threw the pieces into the water. The photo drifted before sinking, the paper folded in on itself, the ring glinting once before disappearing into the deep. I whispered, "Thank you for teaching me how to love, even if it broke me." My voice didn't shake. It was steady, honest, free. When I turned back, Daniel was there. I hadn't heard his car. He smiled, hands in his pockets, the wind playing with his hair. "I figured you'd be here," he said. "Did you say goodbye?" I nodded, for the last time. He walked over and slipped his hand into mine. "Then let's go home." We drove with the windows down, letting the salt air fill the car. There was a quiet kind of joy between us, not the loud, fiery kind, but the kind that settles into your bones and stays. I realized I didn't need grand moments to feel alive anymore. Just truth. Just peace. Just love that doesn't demand pain to prove it's real. That evening, I started a new painting. The canvas was blank for a long time. I didn't want to rush it. I wanted it to mean something. Daniel sat nearby, tuning his guitar, humming a melody that matched the rhythm of the rain outside. I picked up the brush and made the first stroke, soft gold over white. Then another. Then another. The painting began to bloom, sunlight over a calm sea, no storm, no shadows. When it was done, I looked at it and smiled. It didn't represent loss or recovery. It represented arrival. I named it Still Here. Weeks later, it became part of a new exhibition. People came, looked, and many cried without knowing why. The gallery director asked me what it meant. I said it's about surviving love and loving anyway. Daniel played at the opening, his voice echoing through the room. His last song that night was one he wrote for me, "She Stayed." The lyrics were simple. She gave everything and lost it all, but she stayed, not for him, but for herself. As he sang, I felt the story of my life turn into something I could finally let go of. Every choice, every heartbreak, every moment of surrender had led me here, standing in the quiet light of my own peace. After the crowd left, Daniel came to me, kissed my forehead, and whispered, "You know, I think this is your real masterpiece." I laughed softly. "The painting?" He shook his head. "No, you." Outside, the rain had stopped. The world smelled new again. The morning after the exhibition, the world felt softer, like life had finally exhaled. I woke to sunlight spilling across the sheets and Daniel humming in the kitchen. The smell of coffee drifted through the air, warm and grounding. I stretched, smiled, and for the first time in years, I felt no weight pressing on my chest. No ghosts, no questions. Just presence. When I walked into the kitchen, Daniel was making breakfast, his hair still messy from sleep. He looked up, grinning. Good morning, Artist of the Year." I laughed, wrapping my arms around him. "You keep saying that." He kissed my forehead because it's true. We ate by the window, the sea stretching endlessly beyond the glass. Seagulls called in the distance and the waves rose and fell in rhythm. I found myself thinking about how life has its own way of painting, strokes of joy, of pain, of lessons we don't ask for but need. After breakfast, I went for a walk along the shore. The sand was cool beneath my feet, and the tide washed close enough to kiss my ankles. I carried a sketchbook with me. I always did now. Not to capture the scene, but to capture the feeling. The sound of the sea had become my metronome, steady and familiar. As I walked, I saw a small child building a sandcastle, his mother watching nearby. He looked up at me, smiling, and said, "Look, it's almost done." I knelt beside him. "It's beautiful," I said. He grinned proudly. "It's going to be the biggest castle ever." His mother smiled too, tired but happy. When they left, the waves slowly began to claim the castle. Each one softened the walls, carried away a little of its shape. And instead of sadness, I felt peace. Because that's what life is. We build, we lose, we rebuild again. Beauty isn't in how long it lasts, but in how real it feels while it's here. That evening, Daniel and I sat on the porch watching the sunset. The sky was a painting itself, gold melting into rose, fading into deep blue. "Do you ever think about how far you've come?" he asked quietly. "Sometimes," I said. "But mostly I think about how far I still want to go." He nodded. "And where do you want to go next?" I looked at him, then at the horizon. "Everywhere," I whispered. "Everywhere the light still touches." He smiled. "Then we'll go." I leaned against his shoulder, feeling his heartbeat under my cheek. The sound was steady. The rhythm of a life that didn't need rescuing anymore. The rhythm of love without fear. As night fell, I opened my sketchbook and began to write instead of draw. Just one line. He took everything and left. But I gave myself back and stayed. I closed the book, set it aside, and watched the stars appear one by one. Somewhere in the distance, the sea whispered the same sound it always had, but it didn't feel lonely anymore. It felt like home. That's when I understood what love truly meant. It wasn't the promise someone gives you. It was the promise you make to yourself, to keep believing in light, even after the storm. And maybe that's what healing really is, learning that some goodbyes aren't endings. They're openings. Doors to new versions of yourself you wouldn't have met any other way. I looked at Daniel, at the life we built, at the peace we found. The girl who once gave everything and was left behind was gone. In her place stood a woman who had learned how to stay, not for anyone else, but for herself. The waves shimmered under the moonlight. I took Daniel's hand and whispered, "We made it." He smiled. "You did." And for the first time in forever, I believed him. The sea was calm that night, so calm it looked like glass. The moon rested on the water, full and golden, painting everything in soft light. Daniel had fallen asleep beside me, his arm draped over my waist, the quiet rhythm of his breathing blending with the sound of the waves outside. I didn't want to sleep. Not because I was restless, but because I didn't want to miss this feeling, this absolute stillness after years of chaos. I stood up and walked to the porch. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of salt and pine. The stars stretched endlessly above me, each one a silent reminder of how vast life really is. I thought about everything that had led me here, the pain, the choices, the losses that once felt unbearable. And I realized something simple but profound. All of it had been worth it. Not because it was easy, but because it made me real. For years, I had measured love by how much I was willing to give. Now, I measured it by how much I could hold without breaking. I used to think being left meant being unworthy. But now I knew, sometimes people leave because they can't carry their own shadows. And sometimes you have to let them go so you can step back into the light. I closed my eyes and listened. The waves came and went like breathing. Somewhere in that rhythm, I heard my own voice, the one I'd buried for so long. She whispered softly, "You're free now." I smiled through tears, not the heavy kind that sting, but the gentle kind that wash the soul. I whispered back, "Yes, I am." Inside, Daniel stirred. "You okay?" he murmured, half asleep. "Yeah," I said quietly. "I'm just grateful." He smiled without opening his eyes. "Keep that. It looks good on you." I sat beside him again, tracing small circles on his arm. I thought about how love doesn't always arrive like a thunderstorm. Sometimes it comes like this: quiet, patient, steady. The kind that doesn't need to promise forever to feel eternal. The tide rose, touching the rocks below the porch, and I imagined every wave carrying a piece of my past out into the deep. The memories, the pain, the longing, all of it dissolving into something vast and forgiving. Before going inside, I whispered one last thing into the night. "Wherever you are, Ethan, I hope you found peace too." Not because I owed him that grace, but because peace feels lighter when it's shared. As I crawled back into bed, Daniel opened his eyes and pulled me close. "You're cold," he said softly. "I was saying goodbye," I whispered. He kissed my hair. "Then say hello to what's next." I closed my eyes and listened to the sea again, the endless, gentle rhythm of staying, not fighting, not losing, just being. When morning came, the world was bright and new. The sunlight spilled across our room, catching the edges of a painting I'd left on the easel. It was unfinished, a woman standing at the edge of the ocean, her reflection blending with the waves. I smiled. Some stories aren't meant to end. They just fade into the horizon, where everything begins again. So if anyone ever asks me what happened, how I survived, how I moved on, how I found love again, I'll tell them this: he took everything and left. But in the emptiness he left behind, I discovered something no one could ever take: myself. And this time, I stayed.